in our paper, Imagining the Future in Irish Budgets from 1970 to 2015, a mixed methods discourse analysis, it's a bit of a mouthful. Myself and my contributors, Brendan O'Rourke and John Hogan, what we do is we analyze basically how the future is discursively constructed over this 45-year period from 1970 through to 2015 in budget speeches delivered to Dáil Éireann, which is the lower chamber of the Irish legislature. And in order to do this, what we do is first start with a close reading of the opening and closing statements of these budget speeches. This allows us basically to identify the discourses, look at how discursive change has happened, and then we segment basically these 45 years into 4 distinct periods on the basis of these discursive changes. So very briefly, these 4 periods that emerge are kind of from 1970 to 1977. There's a fairly standard Keynesian discourse at play. From 1978 to 1982, this then breaks down, and there is kind of a back and forth between kind of modified Keynesian discourses and a kind of an emerging neoliberal discourse. This then settles down in about 1983, all the way through then to 2008. That's when we see basically the kind of the solidification of a soft neoliberal discourse. And then in 2009, this breaks down and we have a type of neoliberal austerity discourse. So those are broadly the 4 periods that we uncover within this 45-year period. So then using these 4 periods, what we do is we look at how the word future ends up being constructed in each of these periods. So we do this by means of something called colloquy analysis. It's a pretty simple concept. It basically posits that words, generally speaking, get a lot of their meaning from the relationship that they hold with their distance to other words. Or I suppose you could say that a word's meaning is dictated by the company it keeps in relationship to other words. So what we do is we analyze and produce basically a bunch of collocates. These are words that tend to appear within a certain span of this word future within these 4 distinct periods. And then we analyze how those words are constructed in these different contexts. So that's broadly what was done. And I suppose the main contribution of this paper is that it explores this relationship between different discourses and particular constructions of the word future in Irish budget speeches, which wasn't really something that had been done before. A couple of things that are relevant or interesting about this paper. First and foremost, the annual budget speech is an institution in a Westminster parliamentary democracy like the one that we have in Ireland, like Dáil Éireann. It happens every year, and budget speeches, the delivery of budgets, really makes use of and also shapes the kind of economic forecasts which end up playing a role in constraining the types of imaginary futures that we can construct about the economy. And this is particularly apparent really during moments of crisis, and we see this in the paper. So that in and of itself is interesting, but it's also relevant to our present moment. Obviously, we've just come through the past 2 years, a pretty serious public health crisis, but there's also the fiscal constraints or the fiscal issues that are related to that are increasingly becoming more and more apparent now in the months. We're in December 2021 now. So I think this paper has something interesting to offer in that respect as well. Other kind of aspects of interest with the paper, it really looks at how or kind of explores how economic growth ends up being the unquestioned central indicator of what constitutes economic progress in a budget speech. And this is unchallenged between the discourses, between the Keynesian discourse and between the neoliberal discourses that follow. And there's obviously consequences for this that need to be thought about ecologically, socially, and so on. We don't go into these in the paper, but the issue is alluded to and raised. And how it kind of goes beyond the existing literature, really. Like, there's no shortage of discourse analysis on fiscal policy. And there's no shortage of kind of post-structuralist policy analyses, but there's very little work that's been done which examines budgetary discourse through a post-structural discourse theoretical lens. So I suppose really in kind of more plain terms, the methodological framework of post-structural discourse theory tends to have been considered to have traditionally maybe a bit of a methodological deficit. So it's been quite hard to apply these concretely to empirical work. It has been done. There's a lot of good work that's being done, particularly in integrating things like corpus linguistics and more kind of conventional qualitative analysis. But nobody's really kind of applied it to looking at budget speeches, and it's particularly suited to looking at changes in how discourses and ideologies and meaning takes shape and changes over an extended period of time. So it offers that contribution, and it also offers contribution to the literature and discourses and budgets broadly, but specifically in relation to Ireland. To where next with this research, there's two paths that I have in my mind for this that seem quite obvious. The first one is a comparative study across countries, so taking other countries that are Westminster-style parliamentary democracies that have a yearly institution of the budget speech, basically replicating the study and comparing how the discourses are constructed in these countries and how the future is constructed, and comparing and contrasting. That's kind of the first avenue, which is I would say the simpler avenue. The slightly more complex avenue maybe would be a comparative study looking at media. So comparing and contrasting how the future is constructed in budget speeches presented to Parliament by a Minister of Finance in the annual budget speech, and then comparing and contrasting how the future is constructed in budget speeches within, say, newspapers here in Ireland, or radio talk shows, or any other media in which you can then build a corpus around the annual budget. And those really are the two avenues that I see that are open for future research with this paper. This research was also generously funded and helped by the Irish Research Council, so many thanks to them for all the support for this.
Okay,